Hello, I'm Ruben Bressler. Welcome back to the sideboard, and I am here with Dan Holland. Now, he's brought affinity to the table, but it's not the affinity that you might think of when you first think of the deck. Sure, it's got ornithopters and memnites and cranial plating, but it's also got a couple things you might not expect so much. Tell us a little bit about what you've done.
So, like you said, I brought affinity to the tournament, but I looked at Caleb's deck last week and thought that, you know, slamming a Planeswalker or a giant 4-drop just tends to win games sometimes. So I've sort of altered it. I've got these 10 0-drops, some Lotus Petals, and some Mox Opals to power out Tezzeret and the Abyss and or Nether Void.
Right, you have 2 Enchant Worlds in your deck, which is maybe the record for a deck tech that we've done. You've got 1 Nether Void and 1 the Abyss.
Yes.
Now they have they're very different cards, but they have different applications, but they're good. They're good in similar places and in different places. Tell us about why you chose to run one of each.
The Nether Void is great against decks that want to cast spells, control decks all the time. So it was great for me today against, say, Esper Blade that wanted to play Brainstorms end of turn. It's like, well, you got to pay 4 for your Brainstorm, sorry. And then the Abyss, I mean, also conveniently in that matchup was great, blowing up their Batterskull token before anything can happen. It keeps their board clear. Doesn't target my artifact creatures, so I can beat through with a plate. Nether Void is also really funny if you power it out early against, say, a Storm player or an Elves player, and they sit there and say, okay, well.
Yeah, you were saying that you were up against Elves earlier today.
Yes, Elves was
one of your matches.
Was one of my matches.
And so you've basically got 1 Armageddon, which is essentially what Nether Void does. It makes people unable to cast spells against the Ponder decks and the Brainstorm decks. Whereas the Abyss is better against the more creature-heavy decks like Maverick.
Exactly.
And you've also got an Enlightened Tutor, so you're essentially running 2 of each.
Yes.
As well as another way to find other pieces in your deck. Another thing that people might not expect is Thopter Foundry.
Thopter Foundry has been fantastic.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that card.
I wish I had more. It's been great. I tested it out at 3 and was testing against Bug, and it just wasn't doing it. But today, it's a win condition because the Thopter Foundry comes down, the Nether Void comes down, and you can't play anything either. So you end up sacking your lands, which are artifacts, your 0-drops, and all of a sudden you got 6-7 flying power on the board.
Sure.
And you've also gained 7 life.
And that's not even if you turn them into 5/5s with your Tezzeret.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you're very not really all in, but you're very heavy on getting a turn 2 Tezzeret or Enchant World with your 10 0-drops, Lotus Petals, Springleaf Drums, as we mentioned earlier. But you've also got the main plan of Cranial Plating, also backed up by the search of Ponder, Thoughtcast, and Enlightened Tutor.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I took a game off of Bug just going, you know, turn 1, drop my guys, Cranial Plating, untap Cranial Plating, hit you for 18. The guy just goes, that's it.
Sure.
So you have that affinity plan, but also, you know, in the late game, better against the control matchup, like, you know, Blue-White Miracles are going to terminus all your guys. You're like, great, all right, well, you got the Nether Void against it, and you've got the Thopter Foundry, not to mention Tezzeret, so there are ways around those decks.
Nice. Now, moving to the sideboard, you've got some fairly self-explanatory cards in your sideboard. I think we all know what Defense Grid comes in for, Perish is for green creatures, you know, Grafdigger's Cage is for Dredge, possibly Maverick. They're fairly obvious. But there's a couple that I had a couple questions for. The first one is Aethersworn Canonist. Aethersworn Cannon is very good against Storm, very good against Elves. Not exactly big parts of the metagame.
Nope, not huge.
But tell me why you decided to run with Aethersworn Canonist today.
Aside from being a dog to Storm, it's also kind of funny when people are trying to Snapcaster things back. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at Snapcaster Abrupt Decay, and it's phenomenally frustrating.
Sure.
So having the Canonist turns off Snapcaster Mage, which some people would run Graveyard Hate against, and I'd rather be a little more proactive and start the beatdown. Right.
Now you're also running Pithing Needle, which is the only card from Return to Ravnica that you could be running, but you're running M10 ones, of course. What are those specifically against?
It's not too terribly specific. Once in a while, if you get controlled out and you're playing against the Miracles deck and they're just Jacing you all the time, you can needle the Jace, you can needle a Jit, you can needle a Batterskull. You can. There are too many things that you can eat on Mother of Brews, Knight of the Reliquary.
Sure. So it's just a catch-all.
If you happen
to need to side some things out, and they happen to have Top and Jace in their deck, you can bring it in and do whatever happens to be in play at the time.
Exactly.
Sure. Well, what about this? This deck looks fantastic. It looks like it's got completely different game than most Affinity decks.
Yes.
What would you change about the deck?
I'd like to have one more Abyss, probably in the sideboard, to come in against creature decks. It's just too good there. It's pretty good against the classic Show and Tell decks that are not running Omniscience, because, I mean, they don't get the extra turn off Emrakul, and he's just dead to an Abyss. Other than that, I might add another Thopter Foundry to the main deck. Thopter Foundry has won me too many games, and it buys so much time and can just all of a sudden switch to the aggressive.
Now you're not saying Jace, which was a big part of Caleb's plan.
Jace would be nice.
But your fours you're leaning more on Nether Void and the Abyss as your fours, in addition to Tezzeret.
In the deck, I believe, as Caleb said, Tezzeret is the better Planeswalker if you're running these artifacts.
Sure.
Especially here, if Tezzeret lands and ticks up and finds another artifact, you drain for twice the number of artifacts, which often is just dead.
Yeah.
Jace would be nice, but it's tough to decide what you're going to take out of the deck then.
Sure.
Because
you've sort of become a different deck at that point.
Exactly. And probably if I was going to run the Jaces, I'd be running Caleb's list.
Sure,
It looked pretty good.
Well, thank you for joining me in the sideboard.
Thank you very much.